Now, we know the Prime Minister has got the cranky pants on at the moment. Why? Because, as they used to say about Donald Trump, the walls are closing in. Every day, the bookies, the polls, they all tell the same story. The bloke who planned to rule for a generation may, just may, be out of a job in a few weeks' time. Now, my prediction is a minority Labor government, but you can't deny what is going on. Fast-moving polls that get worse for the Prime Minister and the Labor Party as every poll comes out. There's not a week that doesn't go by without some example of the Labor Party falling below 50% in two-party preferred, and once you start to dig into the detail, the data is even worse. I'm not breaking any news to you there, it's just the reality of where we start the conversation this evening. In fact, the latest poll out from the Morgan organisation, and I must say, their polls do bounce around a bit, but tonight it's 51.5 to 48.5. But of course, the Prime Minister knows that he has got many people on his side who, of course, are completely independent, but will, of course, in this campaign, not just give him the benefit of the doubt, but run as hard as they possibly can against any idea of a change in government, that being, of course, many inside the Canberra Press Gallery. Not all, but many. And you have seen that when the polls were terrible after The Voice in 2023, they were more than happy to run the stories that the Prime Minister was looking for a reset over summer and things would be better in 2024. We know that the media are more than happy to repeat ludicrous claims from the Prime Minister that the worst is behind us, that magically everything that has cost how much over the past 3 years is all just melting away. Or, of course, they are covering, like a full election campaign, the dummy election campaign from this Prime Minister, one where there's not a joint he doesn't stop at that he wants to fire the cash cannon at. By the way, it's your cash, of course.
Today we're announcing an equity injection of $3 billion into the NBN. A $7.2 billion announcement today to assist with the Bruce Highway. A really important announcement that will bring up this wonderful city. Today we had the significant announcement of $200 million in housing and community infrastructure for regional WA.
And on and on and on and on. Every day some new announcement as if it was the election campaign, the media covering it as if it is the election campaign, but never actually grabbing the calculator to double-check what the spendometer is at currently for Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party. Since January the 1st, just this year, we're not even 2 weeks into February, $16 billion has been promised by this bloke. $16 billion of your dollars on top of the record spending, on top of the record spending, ahead of budget deficits for the next 40 years. Well, just like the reset after The Voice, just like The Voice itself, and just like the faux election campaign, the money has not moved the needle. The latest polling, again, as sure as tonight, or if you roll back to other organisations with more stable numbers, it shows things rolling Dutton's way and against Albanese week after week, day after day. So, those that are the Praetorian Guard, the chief guards of the Canberra bubble, they are rather focused on a bit of news that they believe will save the backside of the Prime Minister that they prefer. You will have heard this many, many times, but here's an example of what they think will be Albo's best last chance to reverse his terrible standing.
The Albanese government will be sweating on an interest rate cut and will be excited that the inflation figures today open the door for that to be a real possibility when the Reserve Bank meets next month or in April.
The government wants a interest rate cut before they call an election or at some stage during the election campaign. That would be the ultimate sign in their eyes to Australian voters that the economic fight against the inflation dragon, as Jim Chalmers used to call it, has at least been, if not won, then certainly it is winning.
So, decision will be made about this time next week by the Reserve Bank about whether they are going to cut those rates or not. Now, depending on where you look, the predictions are anywhere between 90 and 99% that they're going to cut because other Reserve Banks or central banks around the world have started to do so. But I've got a little feeling that this is not going to be the silver bullet that many in the media, who always give the benefit of the doubt to the government because they like the arrangements they have with the side of politics they prefer, that it is not going to be the silver bullet solution to all problems Albo. Because according to those who have done the numbers, if there was an interest rate cut of 0.25%, which generally speaking it goes up by 0.25%, it comes down by 0.25%, it would save you a grand total of $92 a month if you've got a $600,000 loan. $115 at $750,000, or if you're $1 million, $154 a month. Not a week, a month. Now, of course, would you prefer that money not to be going on your repayment? Sure. But does anyone not believe that your power bill, the cost of petrol, the cost of insurance or anything else is not equally gobbled up by that small amount of money? Instead, it's just a big headline number that they will be able to try to tell you that everything is better. But remember what the reality is here. And then there's some fan fiction on top of all of this. So invested are parts of the Australian media that the Reserve Bank holds the key to the future of the Albanese government, and it must turn that key, sir, in order to give the relief to the government for it to get the clear air to get its rightful place as a re-elected government. This today popped up on taxpayer media, where they start fan fictioning about what the costs are. Now, yes, they had the examples of a 1 month reduction, but then they just start pretending that there'll be multiple rate cuts. In fact, further interest rate cuts could lead to more savings. For example, Canstar says 2 rate cuts would see monthly repayments fall by $229 per month on a $750,000 loan. And if there were 4 rate cuts this year, a borrower with $1 million loan would save $599 a month. Now, I hope that there are 4 rate cuts this year, but there are currently duck egg, maybe, probably 1, but the idea that one automatically leads to another, Remember, this government rigged the way that the Reserve Bank is making its decisions. Rather than meeting on the first Tuesday of every month, it's kind of every 6 weeks, a little bit longer here, a little bit less there. So the decisions that they make will either be lots of dramatic changes because they are meeting at fewer times, or small changes, wait, then another change. That is most likely to be the case of the course of the Reserve Bank governor. But watch this space and watch the media tell you that everything that this government has made worse over the past 3 years will magically be forgiven if you can save $92,000, $115,000 or $154,000 off the repayment of your mortgage in the month of a federal election. And while, of course, it is the decision-making of the Prime Minister as to when the election will be, can I give you a little hint as to the theories around the date? And it's no secret political insight from decades of walking the corridors of power. It's available on the Reserve Bank's website. The Reserve Bank will be meeting on the 17th and 18th of February. Their next meeting will be, as I said, about 6 weeks after that, 31st of March and 1st of April. The suggestions of the election timing is that it could be the first weekend in April or maybe the second weekend in April. That would mean that they don't have to deliver a federal budget. That second number, if the press gallery dreams are right, would be a reduction in the repayments on interest rates and your home loan in the week of an election. But don't forget, half of the country votes early. So the half of the country will not see what may or may not happen from the Reserve Bank. But this is why I do not believe for a second that despite what the media will tell you, because the media told you the voice was going to happen, the media told you that this bloke was going to reset, the media told you that the too little too late tax cuts would completely reverse the government's standings. In every occasion, it has got worse because your financial scenario has gotten worse. And while I hope, desperately hope, as a person trying to pay off a house, that interest rates fall as fast as humanly possible, But the reality of the pain that a third of the country that is trying to pay off its house, and in fact more than, because they might be trying to pay off an investment property as well, is that according to finder.com.au, doing the work for the West Australian newspaper, for every $400,000 you borrow, you have had to pay an extra $14,940 since this government came to power. So if anyone in Labor land or media land thinks that one interest rate drop, that best case scenario for people on $1 million mortgage is $154 saving, that you'll magically forget the almost 3 times that number, because, as I said, I've previously shown you that number and it was the calculation on 500,000. No, I double-checked. It's a calculation on 400,000. So put it up again. Do the maths. Now, the average home loan in Australia is a little lower than the home loan if you are trying to pay off a property in Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane. Certainly Perth, where their market is going nuts right now. So if you're on $800,000, it's $28,000 that you were not paying off your home when this bloke was elected the Prime Minister. That's last year, the year before, and that's the track that you are on for this year. That's why they can tell me as much as they want to that times are changing and we've turned the corner and the worst is behind us. The reality is that the worst has broken many Australians. It has pushed too many Australian families right to the brink. And if you think that they don't have a rear vision mirror or don't have a long enough memory to remember where they were before the bloke who promised to make it better took over and made everything worse, then you do not know the average Australian, which of course would mean you are at times a full-time person who focuses on Australian federal politics. There are some examples, but you know what they're going to do when it comes to this interest rate drop, which I hope happens. I desperately hope happens. But fan-fictioning, if 4 of them, to try to make people think that they're going to be getting way more than they are. Come on. Sleight of hand, well, I know all the tricks, seen them all, so I'll call them out every night for you here on Paul Murray Live. In question time today, there was a little more relentless focus on the government and whether they're going to ever fiddle with more things like superannuation tax or negative gearing. Why is the pressure on them on negative gearing? Because the Greens want it gone. The Greens, of course, could be the ones propping up the federal government after the next election due to a minority government. And the Greens are asking questions like this and setting their price for support.
Will Labor stop giving property investors with multiple properties big tax handouts that turbocharge house prices and deny renters the chance to buy a home, and instead finally phase out negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount?
So it moved to the sane end of the chamber today, where the alternative Prime Minister asked a question about any changes that may well be coming when it comes to superannuation or negative gearing.
Will the Prime Minister rule out any changes to negative gearing and capital gains treatment on property during his time as Prime Minister?
Pay attention to every word the Prime Minister says.
They've had a long time to work out questions in this place. You know what our housing policy is. Our housing policy is $32 billion of a Homes for Australia plan. That's our plan. That's our plan.
Let's do it again. Pay attention to the non-answer, to the pivot, to the change the subject.
They've had a long time to work out questions in this place. You know what our housing policy is. Our housing policy is $32 billion of a Homes for Australia plan. That's our plan. That's our plan.
Now, loyal Labor people will say, no, don't misinterpret. He says that there'll be no change. It's not part of their plan. The only problem is, while every taxpayer got a tax cut too little too late, we all know what they had said going into the last election, which was no plan to change. But of course, they changed their plan and there was a change. They will say a change for the better. But a broken promise is a broken promise is a broken promise, right? And then there was the no changes to superannuation. Oh, that's right. People with more than $3 million in their superannuation are about to get a brand new tax. Now, yes, I get it. $3 million in super is an awful lot of money, but a promise is a promise is a promise, right? Before we even get to the $275 promise, but let's stay focused on this. The reality of the federal budget going into the next 40 years, starting this year, is deficits. Deficits that get worse and 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 worse times 40. And that is not a right-wing think tank, that is the reporting of the Treasury. The intergenerational report, which was released by this Treasurer, is that while federal budget spending goes way up, the capacity to pay for it goes way down, and the margin in the middle is what we add to the trillion-dollar pile of debt. Now, of course, they will say all of these are global factors, don't worry about it. Somehow, if we just import another 10 million people and they all pay as you go and all of them start a small business and some of them pay company tax, all of that will just magically disappear. The reality is that all of that modelling has already been done by the Treasury. And even after all of those assumptions, guess what? The distance between how much they're spending versus how much they have to pay for it gets bigger and bigger each and every year. So forgive me if I do not trust a government that, when asked a question as clearly as the one Peter Dutton asked, does not answer no, hell no, and I will resign rather than make the change, then they are leaving the door open. A door that they have said was closed on superannuation, was closed on tax cuts, but they found a way to reopen it, didn't they? And because much of the media wanting this government to be a success, remember how they first reported those too little, too late tax cuts? Rather than saying how much the tax cut would be in your monthly pay, which is how often you end up paying your tax, or fortnightly, or even take it down to weekly pay, no, they told you the annual number, didn't they? Because it was a bigger number, a scarier number to show you. Or not really scary, an exciting number to show you. But just as we picked it, like the proverbial dirty nose, as I say too often to the kids, the reality is that when they want to spin it, they go up. The reality is it goes down. And for the people earning $45,000, it was $14 a week. Too little, too late. And then the poll came out a month later saying people didn't notice. And then another poll came out like a year later saying 70% of people couldn't name a single thing the government had done to help their financial situation. Maybe that's because we don't trust them. Maybe it's because, yes, if you gave every single person in Australia $1 and you added it all together, it's $27 million. But we all know that $1 for each and every citizen wouldn't pay for virtually anything. And an opinion poll backs this up, that people do not trust where these people may go, and certainly where they would go if the Greens are the tail that's wagging the puppy, as it may well be after the next election. A national poll commissioned by the Financial Services Council showed 44% of Australians do not trust the government when it came to setting superannuation taxes. This goes up to 46% when the government's plan for superannuation balances worth more than $3 million was shared with respondents, i.e. when they were told of the broken promise of the last election. Even more people don't trust what they may do at the next term in government. More than 70% of respondents to the poll, which was conducted by Crosby Textor, said they believed it was somewhat likely or very likely that Labor would introduce further superannuation changes should the party be re-elected. 70% of people know they can't trust them and expect an increase on taxes on the money that, by the way, you didn't choose to put into superannuation. The government forced you to put into superannuation. The theory, of course, being that you would be able to pay for your own retirement, but the reality being that unless you are earning a massive chunk of change, then you have not been able to put aside the best part of 10% of your lifetime income and it to be able to last as long as your body will. Oh, and even then, the people who are earning a particularly large chunk of change, guess what? The law allows those contributions to be capped. So don't automatically think if you're somebody who's in multiple $100,000 that you've got 10% sitting off to the side. Not a problem for many Australians, but interesting about how the system works.